Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is Bob Doto. Bob Doto is a yoga teacher and massage therapist based in Brooklyn and a practitioner of Ashtanga yoga under the guidance of Eddie Stern. Bob is a prolific writer on body-centered spirituality. He is a founding member of the Babarazzi and was the managing editor of the internationally acclaimed Journal of Religious Studies, Parabola. He was also a founding member of the elusive post-art punk band, S-Process, and Bob received his MFA in Writing and Poetics from Naropa University's Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics in 2002, and he is a graduate of the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine. He currently owns and operates the Church Avenue Yoga and Bodywork Center in Kensington, Brooklyn. So with that, hello, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited about this interview because I feel like this is the second part of a two-part series after I had interviewed Alex Auder, who really recommended I interview you for this podcast. So I'm looking forward to a discussion today, which I think will focus predominantly on a project that was very controversial that you were a founding member of, the Babarazzi. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that discussion, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your story and how you came to yoga.
Okay, how did I come to yoga? Well, I had been interested in sort of spiritual things from early on as a kid, right around, the years everyone seems to do it, which is teenage years, mm-hmm. right? If you're going to get into it, a lot of people do it at that time. So around 16, I was 13, 16 in that area. I was playing in bands and punk bands and stuff, and in that world, interestingly enough, there was some spiritual stuff going on and people talking about Buddhism, and there was certainly like Hare Krishnas floating around, and it was just all there. So I had kind of started getting into that kind of stuff and reading about a lot of that stuff and trying to, pretending to be a Buddhist for a while. And I did some fanzines. I did a fanzine called Always Mindful at the ripe age of maybe 15 or so.
Wow.
My mom would photocopy it at her work.
That's awesome.
It was basically a lot of bad Buddhist poetry and worse photographs of bands. So I did that for a while, and then I've been interested in that kind of stuff for a long time, but I kind of resisted the physical part of it, the yoga part of it, for years. And mainly because I remember thinking that if I do it, that it's going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. And if I start doing it, then I'm just going to get hooked. I just knew that somehow. Mm-hmm. And so I just would never go to a class. And mm-hmm. my wife at the time was very much involved in practicing yoga and had been for years. And, she was always like, you should just try it. And then lo and behold, I did. And then that was that, maybe 10 years ago or something mm-hmm. like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe more. And so it was just kind of like part of that, the stuff I was into. I was just more thinking and talking about it rather than doing it, Mm-hmm. So then I just...
You were interested more in the philosophy and the meditation before you stepped into an asana class.
Yeah, anything you could kind of do on the couch, basically. That I didn't have to like go somewhere to do, then I was into it. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, I guess you could say that.
Do you still have those publications that you made at 15 of Buddhist poetry?
Yeah, they're at my mom's house. I did one issue, and then I did 1.5 issue. I did one issue, and then I had another issue which is common with me. I finished it, but I never printed it, mm-hmm. But I have it. It's got the photographs are actually like taped to the paper, and then my mom would go at work and photocopy it. And I remember being so blown away because she could do double-sided copies, and to me that was like.
That's high tech.
So far out. I was like, when she got it back to me, I was like, this is real. This looks real.
Wow.
Because I always assumed it was just going to be one page blank. So I have that. And since then, I've done many zines. I've published newspapers and little booklets, and I've always been just kind of doing pamphlets and blogging and just in publishing forever. So yeah, I did a few issues of that, or 1 or 2 issues of that early one, and then since then, I've done a number of different zines and
nice
and things. Yeah.
I can really empathize with that, the compulsion to create like pamphlets and publications. When I was really young, I would invent fake theater companies and create programs. My grandma took me to the theater, so I would create fake programs with like fake bios of actors. And I was really into newsletters, and so I would put out newsletters about what the next season is, but it was a total fantasy in my head. and I think there's somewhere back home. I have to look them up. But I definitely, in fact, I think actually the project, this website that I'm working on, that this podcast is a part of, is really kind of the evolved, the current manifestation of that kind of young desire to kind of put something out there in the world.
Well, you were like the fantasy football of like thespians.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. We should do that. We need to get like programs of actual people who are performing and create sort of epic performances.
That would be pretty amazing. Yeah.
See if they have a scandal, that'll like, we'll throw that in the mix.
Absolutely. So you obviously, from a very young age, had a desire to publish and to write. Mm-hmm. And one of the projects that perhaps you're the most notorious for your writing, which you collaborated with several other people, is the Babarazzi, which was a fairly controversial project. And I would love for you, for those listeners that haven't heard about the Babarazzi, would you describe what the Babarazzi was? It's still up online, but it's no longer being updated. Right. What the Babarazzi was, what the inspiration was behind the Babarazzi, why the founders felt the need for it, etc.
Where to start? So the Babarazzi was, and is, since it's still online, a site that was taking a critical look at the commercial culture of yoga. That was our thing. So it really had nothing to do with yoga practice. It was very rare that we ever talked about anything related to specific kinds of practices, or is this real yoga or whatever. Any of that sort of discourse we were not doing. So it was solely based on the commercial representation of yoga culture, commercial yoga culture. So that's what it was and is. And the reason was kind of like, over the years I'd been hearing about things, teachers doing this and that, and just lots of stuff in the yoga world, controversies and this, and all of us had been hearing about it, obviously. But I didn't really know much about who the players were. I knew of them, but they weren't really. I wasn't really in that world necessarily. But I just kept hearing about it, and then we were just at some point we were all kind of doing blogs and whatever stuff like that, and we were just like, well, let's just try something. Let's just put it up. What would it look like? If we put up, what would a post look like? One day. So we put up a post that was a very short post. I don't even remember what it was on. I think it was about I don't even remember. It was like a picture of people doing yoga at maybe Wanderlust or something. And we made some sort of snarky comment about it. And then that was that, and it was kind of like, the idea was, well, these people, these sort of yoga celebrity people are saying a lot. We're getting inundated with all this just stuff constantly, and all these ads and all these workshops and just everything, just coming at us. So we're like, well, let's just throw something back at them, And then just around this time, we kept hearing about this idea of a yoga celebrity, like a celebrity teacher. And it just sort of clicked. It was like, well, they're acting like celebrities, but they're not getting the full picture. They're not getting the whole thing. And the celebrity lifestyle isn't just, look at me. It's also the public responding to that and being like, okay, we are going to look at you. So that's what we decided to do, was look at them. And we like to say well, they want the spotlight. Let's give them the spotlight and just keep putting the light on them, And so that was kind of one of the ideas about it. Originally, the Babarazzi was actually not a failed concept, but a highly retuned one very quickly, because the original idea was to be the TMZ of the yoga world. We wanted to just be gossip, just trash journalism, as shitty, trashy as we could make it. That's what we wanted it to be. We just thought that's the other side of the celebrity culture. But we're all very private people, and we like our privacy, and so we decided, no, that to be that, you have to really start prying into people's lives, and let's just not do that. Let's not do that. Let's do something else where we just respond to what they do in the public sphere. So we made that very clear really early on, and just stuck to that the whole time. And we used to get stuff all the time from people telling us, oh, well, did you hear this person and this person is doing this? And, big teachers, emailing us being like, well, I heard, never published any of it, So the site was really about the image of yoga culture, whether that be the people who are presenting themselves as an image, or the products and things like that.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of some problematic symptoms of yoga celebrity culture?
Well, here's the thing. We didn't, and for the most part still don't, see the problems that are in commercial yoga culture are the same problems that are in commercial anything culture.
Yeah, right.
We really saw it as separate. It was just, that's the kind of stuff we were into. We were into yoga, so that was the culture that we were hearing a lot about. If we were into basketball, we would be talking about commercial basketball. We were just all tuned to kind of like commercial critique of capitalism and commerce and whatever. So, the critiques you can make of commercial yoga culture are really the same ones you can make about any other commercial culture. I don't think it really has anything to do with like, is it taking away from yoga or doing it a disservice or anything. I don't really see it like that, So in one sense, yes, I could say a lot about it, but it's almost like there's so much to say.
So you don't see it as taking away from yoga necessarily?
No, I mean, I don't. Yoga's a practice, and it's been around a long time in many different forms. And I don't think that a bunch of, not to go here so quickly, but like white people tend to think that they like, when they do something, it's like earth shattering, even if it's when they're doing something stupid.
Yeah.
Like all this stupid stuff, it's commercial stuff, like yoga's been around for thousands of years in some form, whether it's not the asanas or however you look at it. This stuff is a fad. The commercial side of it's the fad. The practice, the people practicing will still do it. A lot of them, I don't know how many, but people will. And we often thought of that in terms of breakdancing, because a lot of us grew up in the 80s and so we're kind of around and seeing breakdancing. And the thing about breakdancing or punk, was that it comes out, people are doing this weird thing, underground or whatever. Commercial interest comes in, heaps a lot of crap into it and changes the narrative and does all these wild things with it. And then when the commercial culture pulls back and is like, we're done, everyone thinks, oh, well, breakdancing's done and, punk is dead and all these kind of things. And no, it's not. Breakdancing was still going on. The commercial just looked away. And breakdancing was getting more insane, more crazy, more wild, like just more amazing. But the commerce wasn't interested, So I think it's the same thing with yoga culture. When the commercial side is done and moves over to something else, people will feel as if, it really took its toll. Yoga's now dead. Of course, it won't be dead. It's an interesting. People love it.
So there's in a certain sense, what I hear you saying is that we really shouldn't take the commercialization of yoga too seriously as like a legitimate threat against the practice itself.
Certainly not against the practice itself. If the real teachers will be real teachers, the real students will be real students. Like I said, there's plenty of things to talk about with regards to the commercial aspect of yoga, but it has to do with commerce as far as I'm concerned. It has very little to do with yoga because weight loss pills and stuff don't really have much to do with it. Not because it's so bad. It's just because it just doesn't have much to do with it. Nowhere does it say you need to be a certain size or a certain flexibility or a certain weight to practice yoga. Nowhere says that. So
is there? But are there a couple things that you can distinguish in your personal understanding of, yoga philosophy, yoga practice, between the commercial narrative of what yoga is, in a lot of, commercial narratives, as a result of what I hear you saying, the consumerization of yoga, like what distinguishes the practice from, in your understanding, from some of the commercial narratives, or if you can give a couple examples?
When you get up really early, right? When your lifestyle shifts because you're getting up at 4:45 or 5 a.m. or some obscene hour, right? There's just no time to think about any of that stuff. It's just not really present. Obviously, you have a mat, so you had to buy that somehow. But if you're getting up that early, and that's an example, obviously you don't have to do that. But for example, it's just not present. Your mind isn't awake enough to really be thinking about a lot of this stuff. So the practice happens before, and I think that's why in fact, they say that's why the early practice is so important and can be so strong, is because you're actually not even wholly awake. So you just aren't really, that thinking, worrying mind isn't there. And the world of commerce is a thinking, worrying mind. Like that's what it is. It's built on that. It's built to make you worry, make you wish you had something else, etc. If you can get up and you can practice, your practice is done. By the time you're awake and all that stuff is now starting to feed into your brain, you've already finished. You're at work, or whatever. So it might carry over into the next day or something, but what distinguishes the practice from the commercial side is that you do it. You just do it. You don't do commerce. The image and the spectacle of it all is all talk. It's just chatter.
Yeah.
It's a lot of talk, and there's always the whole conscious capitalism movement was really trying to be like, it's not all talk, like we're walking the talk or whatever, but it's still just talk. It's talk. And when you practice, it's usually silent.
Right.
It really comes down to that, like biology.
Yeah.
One, you're opening your mouth. The other one, you're opening your nostrils.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Good.
Distinguishing those two in that way, the talk and the silence. So I want to ask you, because you did I don't want to say target, but there were particular figures, I don't want to name names, but there were particular figures that received a lot of heat from the Babarazzi.
Sure.
And there were certain individuals who saw a pattern in that most of these figures were women. And so there have been criticisms that there was a sexism embedded in the narrative of the Babarazzi. How would you respond to that?
Well, we responded to the things we saw. And the things we saw were not entirely women, from women, but a lot of it was. The commercial side of yoga is targeted to women. It's targeted largely to white women.
Yeah.
Of a certain economic stature, typically.
Yeah.
And that's the subject we were looking at. We were looking at the commercial side, and the commercial side was catered almost entirely to women. So women showed up a lot, on the site. But which is not to say that's not really an excuse. It's just like what was happening.
Right.
We could have easily, when John Friend, there were certain male figures that were coming up that we would touch on, but the men were almost like behind the scenes. Like, I don't know who owns the businesses. Like, I don't know who owns Gaiam or something. I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but I've always heard that like the women are in front, but the men are really the owners of the businesses or something. And like, there's a terrible, displacement of who owns what, as according to gender at least, and race. But that was just the stuff we were getting. Was about the celebrities of yoga, and most of them seemed to be, at least on our end, women. But it was never a conscious thing to do that. And as far as the sexism goes, we said this right. If we put up a post and people thought it was sexist or misogynistic or something, we never really got defensive about that, because they could have been. Some of those posts could have been somewhat sexist. I don't know. But things aren't one or the other. So taken in a certain context, a certain post might be a little bit sexist, and that's a shame. That's not something we wanted to do. But to us, it was part of the conversation. That was never our intention, obviously, at least obvious to me. But things, if we misstepped or put things in an unfortunate context, with that, that was not our intention. That's for sure. And if nothing, it at least brought something to the subject to the foreground. One is, this is not totally related, but someone in we used the term retarded once in a post. We said something like, "Oh, it's so retarded," and people
probably weren't happy about that.
They were not happy about that. And, I didn't think anything of it. Because we were just saying it like you say it, like that careless kind of way of saying that. And there was when someone called us out on it, there was a second where we were like, hey, that term, isn't, in use anymore, so it's kind of fair game or something. And then the person was like, actually, I have a child who is developmentally disabled, and he gets called. That's while the term isn't used, it's getting used against him. And that was like, okay, you're right. So we went back to the article. We didn't erase it. We put a line through it so that people know we used it because we wanted people to say, hey, we messed up here. And then we changed the word. But that's how we approached all that, whether it was about gender issues or allegations of sexism or something like that, which were very I only saw that accusation maybe once about one article. That was I ever saw that. But yeah, that's totally a legit critique, I would say, of the site.
Do you think that this role that I see the Babarazzi filling in the community, which is a kind of critical voice, do you think that this is an important role that often is, now that the site is down and generally there is not this kind of critique going on other platforms, do you think that this is a missing voice in the discussion that's important?
I think, I have to be honest, I don't, and this isn't like, I don't really, I'm not a part of it, but I actually don't totally know what's going on as far as the commerce. I did today, because I knew we were doing the interview, I went back and was like, what happened to all these people we were talking about? What are they doing? And it's a dark world. It's so dark out there. It's really dark. It's dark. Now would have been a great time for us to start. Because a lot of the people we were looking at were just starting their branding, sort of maybe a year in or something. But now it's they're full steam ahead, and it's wild. But anyway, the question was, is it missing? Our intent was we felt that the commercial side of yoga or the celebrity side of yoga was so integrated and ingrained in the culture, it was seeping into the culture of actual practice that, excuse me, gotta edit that burp out, or you can keep it. We thought that it was very difficult for people to tease out a practice from the commercial side of it.
Yes.
So we thought if we gave it a language and we put enough of a spotlight on it, then you could actually see it and be like, oh, that's like a Rodney Yee celebrity sort of thing. No offense to Rodney Yee, he's just one of the big names, right? So, that's that. Am I interested in a charismatic, commercially kind of corporate-y instructor, or do I want something else? So then you could actually make a distinction between the two. So to answer your question, if people feel that commercial culture is still rampant and indistinguishable from the practice itself, then yes. Then someone should do it. We felt pretty good because we felt like after 2 years, people were really paying attention. And there was other people who were sort of hinting at this stuff before and writing a little bit about it. But we certainly felt that when we were done, that lots of people had thought about it. So we were like, okay, good. We don't want to look at these videos anymore. You know? So now we're good. So if that commercial culture is still getting in the way, then yes. If it's on its own, let it be on its own. Who cares?
I think it's getting in the way for sure.
You think it's getting all right? Well, then yes.
But so now I want to because I think that what you and also Alex, when I interviewed her, spoke about is we pretend like this is not different. This kind of commercial culture of yoga is different from the other commercial cultures that we have around us, but really it's the same. But what I see is, and I want to see if you agree with me. What I see as being particular, specific to the commercial, the narrative around the commercialization of yoga, is that there's generally, in other domains of the market, it's par for the course that there's criticism. There's always criticism, and there's a place for it. Well, it seems like, and it seems to me that the response to the Babarazzi was a symptom of the fact that in the yoga commercial domain, there's a sense that because we're yogis, we shouldn't be talking negatively. We shouldn't be critiquing in this way because it's hateful, it's not kind, it's not compassionate. And, as yogis, we're supposed to be all of these, positive, fluffy things. So I'm curious what your response is to that, if you agree with that. And if you think that some of the response to the Babarazzi, the very, and sometimes very aggressive or, inflammatory responses to the Babarazzi is a result of this kind of thought policing of dialogue in the yoga community.
Are we allowed to say shit on here?
Yes, of course. You can say all of the above. Shit, fuck, whatever you want to say.
Because I curse a lot, and I got that from my mom, but I've been kind of reining it in. But that's just total bullshit. I mean, like, the most critical people you will ever meet are sadhus. Go talk to a sadhu at some point, and like they're reading the newspaper. They have all sorts of ideas and critiques of stuff. Every yoga book you've ever read from the old days is a retelling of something earlier and correcting it, critiquing it and correcting it. Some could say that, the Bhagavad Gita people say am I getting the time period right? Is a response to Buddhism? One of them, I forget which one, but they're like responses. They're constantly challenging one another.
Yes.
So whether or not that's an acceptable form of practicing yoga or something is just, it's not even an issue. Like, of course it is.
Yeah.
Like, So you agree with me then that there is this idea that is kind of seems to be pervasive in a lot of people's ideas about what yoga is, that we shouldn't be talking critically, that we shouldn't be, because it's not reflecting this kind of weird puritanical nicety, that is problematic, and that is sort of what's going on with the response to these commentaries. The yoga businesses that base themselves in spirituality, and in our instance with the website, yoga in particular, really felt that there was no place for people to call them out on stuff. And and Yama Talent, which was a perfect example of that. And I say that because she wrote an article. Ava Taylor wrote an article like, why are we wasting our time critiquing each other? We should be doing X, Y, and Z. And it's just crazy. Yeah. It's just like, well, where would we be with it's like almost like, why are we even having this discussion? Like, of course you critique things.
I'm glad you said that, because I was teaching a workshop on the myths around yoga practice this last weekend, and one of the things you see a lot in some of these myths, especially the myths around Shiva, is who's, for those that aren't aware, is considered like the Lord of Yoga. He created yoga, blah blah blah. Shiva is often in these myths taunting sages, so-called sages who are, it's often, he's taunting, he's poking fun at, he is challenging sages who are oftentimes they're performing rituals without kind of the heart of the ritual, missing the kind of true dedication or true intention, and it's sort of this just empty performance that's present. And so but I love that you can find even in these myths many times, and this goes for some of the sages that the poses are named after as well. There's obviously some of these people who are profoundly realized beings according to the mythological tradition. You can see them in many instances challenging and taunting and critiquing.
It's rife. I mean, it's all over the whole thing, and it's based on inquiry. That's how you do inquiry. But this comes from this sort of rejection of that. It just,
where does that come from? Yeah.
It's the spa culture,
spa culture.
It's a very precious idea. People have a very precious, like, yoga's very precious.
Yeah.
It's this thing, it's quiet, it's very clean, the floors are very clean.
Spa culture, that's so good.
It's just spa culture, and that whole thing is like, it's just like, nothing's bad. Everything is just peaceful and serene, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, the people I know who practice the most and who I've looked up to have been very sharp people, very critical. Not critical in like, they're not assholes. They have sharp minds, clear minds. They have big, thick, juicy, puffy hearts, but they have very sharp minds. Yeah. So they're not, you know what I mean? So when you have both of those, it actually becomes quite a lovely, dynamic environment. When you try to shut the one out, the critical side out, you just end up with like confetti or something.
Yeah, and brainwashing, for sure. Yeah. So can you explain, and if you feel this way, because I would love to, because I think that a lot of people think that critique is a form of division. So is there a sense in which you can think about critique and critical commentary as actually being in the service of this kind of like, I don't know, I'm thinking of the wrong word, big-heartedness that you're mentioning about, and openness to actually becoming more more integrated with the people around us, more integrated with ourselves and the world. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I'm not really a big debater when it comes to yoga. Like, I don't debate texts. I don't debate whether this, is it dualism or non-dual. Like, I just don't do that too much. There's a vast tradition of that, in the whole, like, knowledge-based yoga, the reading the text, Gyan yoga, and things like that. So it definitely has its place, and it definitely has its place historically. The people who don't do many asanas, but, like, read I am that over and over and over again or whatever, the non-dualists, that's their world in a lot of ways, is to critique and unpack and use the intellect in a way, to use the intellect to kind of get to this like no state, this non-state of being. So yeah, in the big sense, of course. But for me, it's really like, if you're a good person, you're practicing, if that's your thing, and you're a good person, then you'll critique the things that are worth critiquing and you'll let the other stuff kind of slide. Excuse me. That's how I do it, And I think that's how a lot of the Babarazzi voices, that's the kind of people they were. It was just we had a particular vision we were looking at every day, so we were looking at something specific. But for the most part, it's kind of like, hey, if you're doing your practice and that's something you want to do, then great. And if you're having trouble with it, maybe we can help, But be a good person, shine lights on things that are important to shine lights on and like move on,
Yeah.
Just chill a little bit.
Yeah, right. So, I feel like we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask for maybe some specific examples, if you feel comfortable doing so, of reactions that you got to the site. And how the Babarazzi handled those reactions. And were you ever afraid? Did anyone ever try to sue or?
So reactions to the site were extremely positive. It was constant. Like right out of the gate, we had people, and we used to have them. They'd still be there on the site, where it was just people emailing us constantly, being like, Thank you. Yeah. Like, I never, I've been thinking this, but I've been kind of in the shadows and I've been afraid to say this stuff. And like, I just love the practice. And the most important one that people would say that really touched us was they were like, I'm having such a hard time practicing because I'm getting inundated with all this stuff and it just feels icky. And I had a friend recently who emailed me and was talking about, he's like, I never did yoga. He was comparing it to, he's like, every time I saw yoga, it was presented like it was Green Day. He's like, but all my friends who did yoga present it like it's Fugazi. I don't know if you know these bands, but one's like a pop punk kind of commercial punk band, and one's like an underground kind of like a very genuine punk band, right? So he was basically like, I was getting all this like non-genuine stuff, but the people I knew were very genuine. So he couldn't find it. He couldn't find his window in. So for a lot of people, the Babarazzi ended up being like a window in. Or a door back into the practice. And to us, that was like, great. That's great, As far as negative reactions, we got those. But those were very much in the beginning. In the beginning when it was first kind of happening, like first couple of months in. I mentioned before the interview, but, Elephant Journal tried to publish one of our articles, and they just got lambasted for it. And then you had, big-name teachers emailing them and like being like, you should take this off. People who were in the article, we critiqued a New York Times article that had, the article had Ava Taylor and Sadie Nardini and Leslie Kaminoff and stuff like that. And we were just making fun of the article, kind of, just like the way the article presented the whole thing. And that was the big one. That was the one that kind of like was like, people are reading us, because there was all this controversy surrounding it. That was month 2. Or within the first month. So that was big. We got a lot of emails about that from some of the people mentioned. And, we always responded like, this is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so we got that kind of stuff. Mostly it was hearsay. People kind of like, the people who felt that we were pushing their buttons or attacking them or whatever, they really I think they caught on quick that if they responded, it was just like, all hell broke loose on our end. Like, it was kind of like, and that's why, some people got it worse than others because they interacted with us. So we didn't know them, you know what I mean? Some of them I never knew. I never heard of some of these people before, and they're huge. I had no idea who some of these people were. I didn't know who Sadie Nardini was. I'd never heard that name before. I didn't know who Kelly Morris was. I just didn't know, And then, we're like, oh, there's these people, so let's write about, what's going on. And then, and I think maybe not them in particular, but other ones, they caught on pretty quick that if they responded that we were going to just be like, just keep at it. So then they just stopped, which was very smart on their part.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Just let us do our thing. You do your thing, we'll do ours, and everyone's cool,
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, I want to ask about something that actually just came out. And I'm a little torn about it because people that I absolutely love and admire are on it, and I think it's a well-deserved recognition for sure. But I'm wondering what you think about this, the article, I'm not sure if you saw it, that recently came out, which is like the 100 most influential yoga teachers.
I haven't seen it, but I just heard about it. Someone just told me, and they were like, oh man, the Babarazzi, if you were around. I just heard about it. So I didn't see it. I asked who was on it, and then I heard there was all the obvious names were on it.
And then literally the next day, Yoga Journal came out with the 10 most influential yoga teachers.
Okay. Well, there you go.
So so I'm just curious, if you have any comments about it, and what is this influence? What does it mean in this kind of a context, given the commercial nature of yoga that we're talking about? What is it to be of influence in that way?
Okay, well, my first thought was, wow, that's a lot. 100, that's probably most yoga teachers. Most yoga teachers. So they're like, oh, the 100 most influential yoga teachers are the yoga teachers. So it was like, that's really just a thumbs up to yoga, I guess. When I heard who was on it and who was not on it, it just sounded to me like they were talking. Who put it out? Do you remember who put it out?
It was Sonema.
What's Sonema?
Sonema.com.
What is that?
It's a website. It's like a lifestyle yoga website that the Babarazzi would probably love.
Yeah.
That
Sonema?
has Sonema. It's called. They also have they have a foundation and it's basically owned by and operated and funded by this this woman with a lot of money, some benefactor.
This is you're seeing how literally out of the loop. And the Babarazzi were constantly trying to play catch up because none of us knew any stuff.
Sonema's relatively new.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I got from that, from hearing who was on it, was that they're talking about who's been the most influential in the commercial market. That's what they're talking about. There's probably a couple sort of less commercial people that show up in there. I imagine there has to be if there's 100, but. Sounded to me like the people were just kind of the most influential in directing the market, towards different styles of yoga or creating brands. Most influential in branding is probably a big deal. If you're talking about Anusara or, Core Power or whatever these things are called, I imagine it's more that, I just
doesn't necessarily mean anything about how these teachers have influenced someone's personal practice.
It could. If I imagine these teachers.
One would hope.
Yeah, one would hope. I imagine that they are more than just their brand, and that when you actually take a class with some of these people, that there is good stuff there. I have never taken a class with. I don't think any of the people that I've mentioned thus far or on the site. I don't think so. I'd have to look back, but I imagine that they have something to say. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's the case, but I don't know. It's not really like yoga. It's not that this whole they're influencing. It's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
It's it's just something you do. Mm-hmm. You get up and you do it. Mm-hmm. That's what you do. It's it's old. It's got, it's everyone here is just trying to change it and manipulate it and progress it. And let's progress it. It's I don't know, just do it. Just do it.
Well, that's the addiction to the new that's embedded in capitalism. They have to rebrand it in order to stand out.
Yeah. If you're not presenting something new, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. So like I said, they could certainly be influencing people on a personal level. but I can't imagine that they're being voted as the top 100 because they're influencing individual people. I just don't know how they're even quantifying that. Did they go around and ask? I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
So what can they be quantifying it on? The only thing that magazine is seeing is how they're presenting themselves.
Right.
So just by the nature of how they probably conducted the survey or the whatever you call it.
Who's got the most Facebook likes?
Who's got the most Facebook like? Who seems to be like in the scene? Who's stirring things up?
Yeah.
Because it can't. I'm sure they didn't talk to. If 100 teachers have 100 students, I'm sure they didn't talk to whatever that number turns out to be.
They probably didn't go into that much
so
detail.
then it has to be based on something else, and that something else is branding.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right, I want to ask about something else that's sort of pretty current, but I think it's it's a perennial problem, or it seems to be, at least current perennial problem, if there is such a thing. I really don't want to talk about the specifics of who these people were, but I want to talk about the general issue of guru-student abuse, because it's recently popped up in the news again. And I personally, it's such a hard thing for me to navigate, because as a teacher, I certainly don't put myself on a pedestal, and it's hard for me to imagine myself ever in a situation where a student would feel that I had negatively impacted them in that way. But what is your understanding, or what is your critique, if you have any, of the guru-student relationship as it's being practiced today? And what kind of responsibility do you place both on the guru and the student in these situations where the student is suing the guru, or the student is going public about abuses by the teacher, etc.?
Okay, so my understanding of the guru tradition in India, as I have seen it, but even more so as I've heard from people who have been around longer than I have, the guru, and we have to talk about it because that's where it comes from, right? So the guru tradition is that people have oftentimes a number of gurus. You have your harmonium guru, you have your spiritual guru, you have your yoga guru, you don't always have one, right? And they're these embodiments of the practice they are teaching themselves, and because these practices are highly linked to God and spirituality, they in turn become vessels for that kind of stuff, that kind of spiritual, deep kind of stuff. So you have a relationship with these people, and they're like big deal teachers to you, So that's what that is, as far as I understand it. Now, the gurus that came to the United States, okay, so also in India, you have sort of your celebrity gurus now. And this has been a part of their culture for a long time. You see them on billboards and stuff when you drive around. So then you have the celebrity gurus, who are just big shots. They're just big, they fill up theaters and the whole thing. Those are the ones that we hear about.
Yeah.
Those are the ones who came here. And if they weren't that then in India, by the time they came here, they started to do that. And it might have taken some time for some of them, but eventually they get to that status. So we start to import this guru tradition into the United States, but we don't import it in the way that it has been for thousands of years in India. We only import the big shot ones, and that idea of what their role is. And those big shot ones have a very particular take on what it means to be a guru, slightly different than what the other ones I was just talking about might take. Now, that happens, and what you have at the same time around in the 60s is you start to have Westerners kind of getting into this stuff. And then you have Adi Da, and you have like Western gurus now. You start to have Western gurus. They've taken on the idea of what these big shot gurus, it's like to be a big shot guru. And now it's all about them. I am the guru for everything. You want a harmonium guru? I'm that. You want a relationship guru? I'm that. You want a yoga guru? I'm that. They're all of it. They're a one-stop shop, basically, right? Which it wasn't necessarily the case. You know what I mean? You don't talk to your harmonium guru about necessarily matters of other concern. Though you might, but that's not really the deal there. So So then you have that, right? Then you have that happening. And then when you have that, you have the students, and they've got no idea. They don't have any of the mental infrastructure on how to relate to this, because not only that, this is a very specific kind of guru representation they're dealing with. So you mix that, it's just like a recipe for disaster at that point, you know, because the idea of a teacher to us is like the teacher, the drill sergeant, you know, so they took on those qualities, you know, that's how we understand the preacher, the priest, you know. So then you've got that going on, you know, and now this is 40, 30, 40, 50 years later, you know, you've got what we see today, which is people who don't, it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. Like I'll often talk about like the simulacrum, right? Baudrillard's big thing, which is a bit dated now, but I still think it's relevant. And this is part of it. It's like the copy of the copy of the copy without any understanding of the original. It's
like a failed game of telephone.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the time you get to where we are now is you have this, and now you have litigations and stuff for real abuses, for in some cases, I guess. I don't know all the details, but so you have that. So you have this kind of superimposed replica of a replica on our culture that doesn't really fit.
It doesn't resonate.
And it's very young. I mean, we're talking 50 years of something that has been organically arose almost out of the ground of another continent. You know? So it's just a fucking storm over here. It's just a clusterfuck, you know? It's better to not go down that path.
It seems to, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I totally agree with you. But it seems to me also that there seems in this appropriation of the guru, that is just rife with all of the things that you're saying, our own socialization and whatnot. There seems to be wrapped up in it, and what perhaps contributes to these abuses is a kind of maternal or a paternal investment in these particular figures. I'm wondering if you agree with that, because it seems like they're like father figures or mother figures to people. So there's a certain like Oedipal narrative there that's a part of that relationship that then, you know, you have to overthrow the father at some point, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that shows up in India, so I don't want to like romanticize that.
Yeah.
But I find it very hard to believe that your harmonium guru, who would be a true guru in every sense of the word, is a stand-in for your father when it comes to the Indian tradition.
Yeah,
It just seems weird.
Yeah.
You know? But here, that's what happened. I mean, we never really got to write about this on the Babarazzi, but my feeling was that the best example we have of this kind of like full devotion practice is in S&M culture. Where that's where I would see it having the most, being the most fruitful. Because there it's voluntary. Okay, again, I don't want to romanticize. There's obviously dynamic things going on. But the idea being that if you want to relate to a guru as I'm giving my entire self over to the guru, it needs to be voluntary, just as you would in a master-slave relationship or like some other sort of deep S&M, right? Right? Not just like the mall version. You know, like I am giving myself over to this person voluntarily. Here's my safe word. Here's this. You know, so we can check out. But in those moments, in those times where you are fully given over to another person, you can then have the experiences of selflessness. You can then have the experiences of, it's not me, it's something else, it's my God. But then, cacao, right? I'm out, safe word.
Yeah,
right?
Well, and exactly, and I like you using that as an analogy, because what is interesting about that example is that there is a space for that. It's like, it's a bracketed aspect of our lives in which we enter this, S&M context, and you serve as, you act as the slave, you have your safe word, and then you leave that behind to go back to your egalitarian dynamics or whatever.
Exactly, yes.
So it's interesting that, even to be fully devoted in that way, it's still only a particular segment of our experience. Is a particular layer, and not the entirety of ourselves.
And you can give yourself, and say it lasts a year, say it lasts a week. All right, say it lasts a week, right? In that week, you can have the experience of this will last forever. This will be, you can go as far as you want, but there's a context that is safe, for lack of a better term, but that's a good term, that you can do that in, and then you can come out, right? That's where I want to see it go. What was going on now is it's just all weird, just like misunderstandings of this tradition and that tradition, all like, we have the tradition,
Yeah, and then people not equipped with the tools to recognize their own psychological bullshit, which is contributing to whatever projection they're placing on their teacher.
Yeah.
It seems like. Not to exempt the teacher from responsibility, but I think that, whenever we cite, it seems like in the media, whenever someone is cited as a guru, there's an automatic assumption that, abuse, power dynamic, the student is exempt of responsibility, poor little student, abused by teacher. Right. When it just seems like, I don't know, that seems like a cheap response.
Yeah, I know, and I'm guilty of it. I'm always like, be an adult, use your head, but like people come from different backgrounds and have different family lives and stuff. So like you have to be gentle with it. You know?
And institutions can manipulate people, and a lot of these teachers come out of big organizations. Right. Okay, so now I want to move on to something because we don't have much time left, but I really want to ask you this because when we were messaging each other about possible topics, this just stood out, and I had to look it up. So anarcho-mysticism or mystical anarchism. Okay, what is it, and how can it be seen as connecting to yoga practice?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
this is probably its own interview, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's, when you're asking like things I've been interested in. So over the years, I've kind of been interested in sort of leftist politics and stuff. And of course, if you're interested in that, you eventually end up looking at anarchism. And, because I was also interested in mysticism and spirituality, I found where the cross section, there's been some cross sections of that by certain writers and stuff, very much coming out of the 60s and 70s, but really hitting in the 80s and 90s with chaos magic and stuff. Not that I do any chaos magic, or I'm not a chaos magician, but, all that stuff is kind of flirting with this idea of like mysticism in a non-hierarchical kind of anarchistic way, So that's just been around me for a long time.
Can you describe what that looks like compared to hierarchical mysticism? Like, can you give an example of hierarchical mysticism versus...
Well, it's kind of like we were just talking about. It's voluntary. It's almost like voluntaryism. You know what I mean? It's like you can go into a very hierarchical situation, but it's voluntary, so you can come out of it. You can use structures, so that structures are not a given, right? So the hierarchy is not a given. The hierarchy is a version of a structure that you can use for certain benefits. Sometimes it's good to have a beneficial dictator in like the group for a little while, but you don't want it all the time, so you want to cut out, right? Or cut them down, right? So it's voluntary. I choose to participate in this sort of highly hierarchical order of mystics, and then I want to like wander the earth and, like be my own god. It's that, where you can it's more playful in that sense rather than sort of inherent, So yeah, so it's hard to say like how would it differ visually because it's all over I mean, you know what I mean? It's it's hard to say how that would show up visually. You just know people. You just know people who kind of take that approach. They just have a. Whoops! I just shut off my microphone for a second. That would have been bad.
Yeah, I'm always afraid of that happening.
Yeah.
All right, so. Okay, so last questions. So obviously we've been talking a little bit. I feel like a lot of this discussion has circled around notions of the spectacle, which you bring up, which I'm assuming this is a Guy Debord concept?
Guy Debord, yes.
Debord?
Guy Debord.
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 Debord, okay. So how is this concept similar to, if you see it similar to Maya, the concept of illusion?
Well, the situationists who were, Guy Debord's kind of that was his people.
Guy Debord, okay. I really did butcher that name.
That's how I mean, maybe I'm saying it wrong. That's how I always knew it. So yeah. That guy who killed himself eventually. think he shot himself in the heart or something terrible.
Wow.
Something very French. Something very French to do. But so the Situationists had this one thing that they said that I really took to heart, which they said, so the spectacle is kind of like the facade, just like the representation of organic, authentic, genuine human experience represented back to the public. They said, take it seriously. That was at least one of their things. They were always contradicting each other and changing. They were always critiquing each other. But they said at one point, take it seriously, take it literally, I think they even said. So when Pepsi or some soda company says, we're the best, say, okay, well, prove it. Take them literally, take them at their word, so engage it, and I always thought that was just kind of brilliant because when you start taking what commerce, and this very much true in the yoga world that presents itself in very much the same way as any other soda company or anything else, when you start taking it literally as if someone's talking to you, it becomes very much an affront on your person because they're yelling at you. The speech of commerce is yelling. It's exclamation points. It's bold type. It's just constantly
capital letters.
Exactly. So it's constantly yelling at you. And you would never stand for someone in your room talking to you the way that commercial yoga culture even talks to you.
So true, yeah.
So, how does that relate to Maya, the illusion? I mean, I once heard a Zen priest whose name I can't remember, this was years ago, say, well, everything's real, right? Everything's real. Because someone was talking about, it's all an illusion. He's like, well, it's all real.
Yeah.
So you have to engage in it. You know what I mean? The illusion may be may have an elusive quality to it. Maya may have an elusive quality to it, but it is not neutral.
Yeah.
It is not a neutral experience. So you should engage with it, and that's where people get in trouble when they're like, politics is bullshit, because it's all an illusion anyway or something. It's but it's an illusion that has a direct effect.
Totally. It's like the difference between escapism versus engaging in order to neutralize whatever the effect is or the symptom is.
Yes.
You can't just say it's an illusion and then run away because it's still going to have a material effect on your life, even if you're ignoring it or not. Rather, it's the illusory quality is real, but the only way to neutralize its illusory quality is to engage.
All the spiritual teachers that confronted something called illusion or Maya, it was not a passive experience. Maya was presented as something tantalizing, whether it was like the olden days, like a woman or whatever, you know what I mean? Or like sweets or money, or like all the riches in the world. It wasn't neutral. It wasn't passive. It was like, take this, do this, do this. And these people had to resist it or get kind of judo on it and do stuff with it. They engaged it. That's what they did. It was not, they didn't turn their back. They either stood their ground or they pushed it away or they did whatever the techniques they were taught. Jesus had his techniques, Buddha had his techniques, so you gotta, it's not going away.
Yeah.
And it's out to get you.
Wow. It's out to get you folks. Well, that's a good place to end on.
That's a terrible place to end on.
I like to end on notes like that. So this has been an awesome conversation. I wish we could chat more. We'll have to do it again for sure. But to end with, I wanted to just ask or give you an opportunity to share your main projects at the moment. Obviously, you have a studio here in Brooklyn. So if you want to give some details maybe on some workshops that are coming up, if you're doing any retreats or any trainings or anything that you want to share.
Sure. This won't affect anyone because it's tonight while we're recording this, but I am giving a talk tonight at the center, and I run what you mentioned in the beginning, own and run the Church Avenue Yoga and Bodywork Center. And quite simply, it's a place where we teach yoga in the morning. It's based on the teachings of Krishnamacharya as they pass through Patabi Joyce. There's a bit of Vinyasa Krama. It's very, very individual-based practice. And we do that from about 6:30 to 11 a.m. in the mornings during the week and a bit on the weekend. And I practice a form of bodywork known as Tui Na, which is a Chinese form of not really massage therapy, but kind of, it's body work with the hands. And I do that. And Yeah, it's a pretty simple place. People feel when they come there that it's very simple, and it allows it to, like, a simple place allows people to have the deep experience. I
Yes,
think.
yeah.
Because the stuff is already, you don't have to do much. If you're getting up and you're practicing, it's pretty intense.
Yeah,
you don't
totally.
need anything else. So
Yeah.
so that's what I do there.
Great. And what's the website?
The website is www.church-av.com.
church-av.com.
That's the one.
Great.
Yeah.
And then finally, do you have one of the things we offer on the website is what I call the Embodied Philosopher's Library, which is just a very large annotated bibliography of a lot of different yoga and wisdom books. So I'm wondering if you want to share a couple books that inspired you on your path. I mean, I know there are doubtless so many, but, if two
It's
or
like,
three.
what's your favorite band?
Yeah, right. I know. People always find this a little bit challenging.
I mean, if you look, there are books.
There's a lot of books here, yeah.
everywhere. So, God, I mean,
Well, if you think of some, you can send me an email and I can put them in the show notes.
I'd love to send you just a quick little list. I'll give you like a half a dozen.
Yeah, great. That sounds good.
Sorry, guys.
All right, yeah, you'll have to check back for that, guys. All right, thank you so much, Bob. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
You too.
Well, friends, that was our interview with Bob Doto. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in meeting Bob or attending any of the workshops or classes that he has at his center in Brooklyn, if you're visiting or you live in the New York City area, again, the website for his center is www.churchav.com. That's church-av.com. Until next time, friends, namaste.